Please welcome to the stage Jayathma, Wickramanayake.
Hello. Happy 10th anniversary to the Social Good Summit, and huge congratulations to our friends at the UN Foundation, Mashable, UNDP, and 92Y. I'm sure the next 10 years will be just as great, and we'll continue to support our common agenda 2030 for sustainable development. Following the global climate strike on Friday, yesterday, around 1,000 young people, young activists, community leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, artists, and diverse change makers came from all around the world and gathered at the United Nations for the first time in history. They had some very strong messages to the UN Secretary General and the head of states and ministers who are preparing for the Climate Action Summit tomorrow at the UN headquarters. I'm here today to summarize those discussions that happened yesterday and send out these messages through the Social Good Summit to the world leaders and the leaders, the young people, young leaders themselves, to make sure that their voices are heard loud and clear. The discussions were so rich to summarize in 5 minutes, but I'll tell you some of the 10 key messages and what they were. First one was that we cannot treat the climate crisis like an issue that needs debate. It is not an opinion. It is a fact. In fact, it is an emergency that needs urgent action. The second point was climate and environmental justice are matters of human rights. The poor, marginalized communities suffering from the adverse impacts of climate change, especially in the Sahel, Pacific and Caribbean islands, are not the ones responsible for the massive carbon emissions that is causing global warming. 71% of the greenhouse gas emissions today are caused by only 100 companies. These companies and corporations need to be held accountable for their actions. The third message was that in areas experiencing devastating impacts of climate change, women and girls continue to be disproportionately affected, challenging their access to basic human rights, basic social services, and safety and security. Fourth point was that freedom of expression of young people need to be protected and upheld. Not in every country it is conducive or safe to protest, to strike, or to demonstrate. Many young activists face retaliation, violence, and arbitrary arrest because of their activism. The need to create safe spaces is extremely important to protect young people's freedom of expression. There is an unfair power balance between youth climate organizations and donor organizations. It is difficult and sometimes even impossible for youth organizations to access funding due to structural barriers. Accessible funding for youth organizations and other resources support to organize and implement their activities and projects remain a crucial need. The sixth point was the Paris Agreement is rooted in intergenerational equity, and the young activists called upon the duty bearers and policymakers to respect these principles, respect the agency of young people, and the rights of future generations. Article 12 of the Paris Agreement calls for climate education. But still, in many parts of the world, this is not implemented, and information about climate change is not available for students. This needs to change. The facts that governments are still subsidizing fossil fuel and building new coal plants were confronted by the young activists, and there was a strong call for action for politicians and institutions to distance themselves from the fossil fuel industry. Young people need to be included in the design, implementation, and review of the national plans to align with the Paris Agreement, such as the determination of the national determined contributions, adaptation plans, and mitigation policies. The last point was that climate change is an intersectional issue and it needs to be treated and addressed like one. These summarized 10 points, again, do not do any justice to the depth of discussions that happened yesterday. However, yesterday was an incredible moment of solidarity where young climate activists from the global north and the global south came together echoing these messages in one voice. They are changing the way they live their lives. The way they travel, the way they recycle, what they eat, what they wear, and how they organize. At an individual level, this is a generation who are extremely conscious of the decisions they are making as consumers. Individual change is great, but that is not enough. To tackle the biggest crisis that our planet has faced and is continue to facing, we need to change systems, especially our economic and political systems that puts profit over the people and planet, feeding on unfair globalization, colonialism, patriarchy, and racism needs to change. From what I've seen yesterday and the day before, until that system change is done, these young people will sacrifice their education, their childhood, hopes, dreams, and keep fighting so that we are all pushed in the right direction before it's too late. So let's make sure that they don't fight alone. Thank you.